as we made our adjustments in the room, and I do appreciate a little bit of accommodation in the back of the room. By way of quick introduction, I do have, oh, this is confusing now, isn't it? You see the two ladies that look a lot alike? Okay. The one that just talked, that's the one who's been talking to you. The one in the white sweater, that's the one whose hand I'll hold when I go to Walmart. My wife, Michelle. Now, sitting next to my wife is my dad and my mom, Terry and Rose Moeller. And the reason we need space for them in the back is because some of the stories I might tell might include them as participants, and I don't want my dad standing up interrupting me in the middle of this to correct it. You can check in with him for any inaccuracies after the conversation that we have. Certainly, I also want to acknowledge that it is a long morning for you in terms of physiological and the blood flow, etc. So if you have a need, please, 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 by all means, just take care of it. I won't be offended, and I'll do my best to not embarrass you at any point in the process. So I am Trey Moeller, and this is my 31st year with Webb City Schools. I started as a high school math teacher. During the 7 years that I was in the classroom, I was also a football coach, basketball coach, baseball coach, did one season of track. After my time in the classroom, I was a high school athletic director and assistant principal for 3 years. Then I came here to the junior high for 12 years and served as junior high school principal. 1 year back to the high school as high school principal, and Dr. Cooper and I actually moved to the central office the same year, and now this has been my 8th year as assistant superintendent with Webb City Schools. Some of you have already, well, maybe not everyone, but I also serve as an adjunct professor for Missouri Southern and for Lindenwood University. Some of you have experienced some of the adaptive schools pieces. Along the way, I've become a national trainer for an organization called Thinking Collaborative. Specifically, the training I do is adaptive schools. For our purposes today, more important than who I am there, today I'm Trey. I'm a son, the son of Terry and Rose. I'm a brother, the brother to Todd and Kim. I'm a brother-in-law, and I'm a husband to my wife, Michelle. Michelle and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary just this past spring with a trip to New York City and Hamilton on Broadway. Thank you very much. Frozen 2 and Wicked, but nothing like Hamilton. Nothing like Hamilton. And I'm also a dad. I'm a dad to Trishelle and Trenton. So today I'll share some stories. And they're my stories. But more than that, they're not just my stories. They're all of our stories. I invite you today, as you listen to these stories, to find yourself, the friends that you have, your family members, in the stories. Because you're there. These stories aren't unique or special. They're mine. And they're ours. And while I acknowledge that I'm also your boss, and I made you come and listen to this, I also know a few other things. Every one of us in this room has been created for greatness. The degree to which we achieve that greatness in our life, that purpose in our life, is related to how we persevere through some difficult times, the character that we develop, And the hope that we have through that endurance and that character building, that no matter how good or bad today is, tomorrow can be better. I know that you're in this room because some element of your greatness is about helping other people find their greatness. You'll teach them. I know that the degree of that greatness then also is closely related to the decisions that you make in the moment. How you deal with different situations, who you are. In fact, when I think of that, it reminds me of a poem, and I'll share that poem with you. It's written by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, and the title of the poem is "Which Are You?" It goes like this. There are two kinds of people on earth today. Just two kinds of people. No more, I say. Not the sinner and saint, for it's well understood. The good are half bad, and the bad are half good. Not the rich and the poor, for to rate a man's wealth, who puts on... You must first know the state of his conscience and health. Not the humble and proud, for in life's little span, who puts on vain airs is not counted a man. Not the happy and sad, for the swift flying years bring each man his laughter and each man his tears. No. The two kinds of people on earth, I mean, are the people who lift and the people who lean. Wherever you go, you will find the earth's masses are always divided in just these two classes. And oddly enough, you will find too, I ween, there's only one lifter to 20 who lean. In which class are you? Are you easing the load of overtaxed lifters who toil down the road? Or are you a leaner who lets others share your portion of labor and worry and care? Which are you? Could almost be the end of the story, but today it's the start. My story starts with my maternal grandparents, second-generation immigrants from Germany who had a farm in southern Illinois. They spoke their native language, German, on that farm. And my mom, Rose, the youngest of six, she was the lucky sibling, the sixth sibling, because her older brothers and sisters had already gone to the English-speaking schools and could help her learn English when she went to school. Now, of the six, she might not have been as lucky, because she was 8 when a blood clot took the life of my grandpa. An English language learner raised by a single parent. My paternal grandparents met in Kentucky when my grandfather was stationed with the U.S. Army during World War II. They met at a social event. They kind of liked each other. And eventually they were married. My dad, the oldest of 4 children. The day after he was born, my grandma told my grandpa, by the way, I'm not 19. I'm only 17. Grandma and Grandpa had a little bit of let's just say Grandpa wasn't happy. Grandma didn't have an education beyond the 5th grade, growing up around Louisville, Kentucky. My grandfather, he fought in World War II. He was in charge of a tank. And what we can put together about his career in the Army, because we've had to put it together, Grandpa wouldn't talk about it. In fact, the family rule as we perceived it, I don't know that growing up I would have perceived the rule, but I knew that we couldn't talk about World War II. But as we've put some of the history together about my grandpa's experiences in World War II in charge of a tank, his unit was the second tank unit to come through after the Battle of the Bulge. His unit was in charge of cleanup. And I can only imagine what was left after the Battle of the Bulge and what he was cleaning up. His unit went through France. We have pictures of him in Germany. Again, we don't know all the details. I know that when I went back to my grandfather's funeral, I was a sophomore in college, and I had the honor of serving as pallbearer at his funeral. And I remember sitting out on the front porch of the church with a friend of his, another pallbearer, and we sat on the front porch of the church, and he said, "Trey, your grandpa was the hardest working man I knew." He was part of that generation where the answer to life was work hard. Things are tough. What's the answer? You work hard. Things aren't going your way. That's all right. Work hard, and you'll be okay. And you'll be okay. I remember, as I think back on the funeral and the hard-working grandfather, I remember some of those times as I was growing up with him. My mom and dad, they'd take us back to their hometown. My grandpa would use charcoal grill, and I use a charcoal grill, not the cheating gas kind. And I'd grill my burgers, my steaks on a charcoal grill. Because I remember as a young child sitting with the charcoal grill in the backyard, pitching horseshoes, and listening to Jack Buck do the play-by-play of Cardinal baseball. Now, honestly, you haven't heard some of the bantering that's going to happen at some point during the year, especially this weekend, with St. Louis heading to Kansas City about ready to kick the crap out of the Royals. But the bantering between Dr. Cooper and myself, and we have a lot of fun. He is a die-hard Royal fan. How anyone can wait 30 years for a winning team is beyond me. So I respect him for his endurance. And how he can put up with an obnoxious St. Louis Cardinal fan who knows they have a chance to win every single year, thank you very much, is because we know that as fans, it's more than just whether they're winning baseball games or not. There's something else attached to it. And for me, it's charcoal grills, horseshoes, and Jack Buck calling the play-by-play. There were some other things about my grandpa, though, that were also true. And I don't know if it was the demons of war, whether it was periodic times of unemployment and this work ethic issue of a generation, but my grandpa drank. When he was working, he would stop at the bar on his way home with his paycheck, and he would drink. In fact, he was a good friend to anyone in the bar, and if they didn't have any money, he'd be more than happy to buy them drinks. So while he was working, the paychecks didn't make it home, but Grandpa did. And my dad, the oldest of four, he was the one that Grandma would wake up in the middle of the night to ask for help bringing Grandpa back into the house. When Grandpa wasn't working, that was okay too. As far as the drinking went, well, it wasn't okay. But Grandpa could still go to the bar, and he could still drink, because there were plenty of people that owed him a drink. In any case, my dad grew up in a situation affected by substance abuse. One of the frequent consequences of a home affected by substance abuse is poverty. My dad, as a young man in the 1950s, grew up, as I would say, he grew up on that side of town. Dr. Cooper mentioned the $500,000 house. They weren't on that side of town. The houses with no running water. So as a young man, as a young boy growing up, Dad used to have to take care of business. Dr. Bird's business. Remember Dr. Bird's business, right? In the outhouse in the backyard. In fact, Dad will tell the story, and he tells it a lot better than me, and you might ask him later. I don't know if you're going to want him to or not. But as a teenager, as an adolescent junior high school student, Dad lived on that side of town in that house and had one pair of shoes. Another one of those things that happens in poverty. One pair of shoes. Well, it's the dead of winter. So you got to have a plan, because when you wake up in the middle of the night and it's an emergency, the last thing you want to do in January is run downstairs, go out in the backyard, take care of business, and then get back in bed. So he kept a pot underneath the bed. And one particular night, got up, took care of business, went back to bed. Woke up the next morning, slipped one shoe on, slipped the other shoe on. Might not have been the pot I was using last night. Adolescent, junior high, wore the one pair of shoes that he had to school. I'll just say he was an angry kid coming from a house affected by substance abuse, living in poverty. Maybe you went to school with some of those kids. My dad loved ball. And in many ways, I would say ball saved his life. Kind of. He was a good basketball player. It's hard to believe now you look at him, he's only 5'8". He'll argue with me later. He'll argue with me later that he's 5'9" or something like that, or 5'10". So there'll be a fight. There'll be a fight over that. But as a young, scrawny little guy, he could still play ball. And his freshman year in high school, he was the starting point guard on the sophomore basketball team at the beginning of the year. But something happened. Maybe it was attitude. Maybe it was the coach's fault. But by the end of the freshman season, he was third string point guard on the freshman basketball team. Now, as a sophomore, he goes out for basketball, and there was this situation during basketball practice where he tripped over another player's foot at one end of the court. Now, if you knew my dad, now I'm going to say that figuratively, you think about the students that you knew that might have fit or come close to that particular description. Think of who they are. You didn't bump into them in the hall because there was going to be a fight. The chip on their shoulder. So in basketball practice, he's tripped during basketball practice, but he's smart. He lays low. The coach is still in the gym. But later, after practice is over, the coach goes down into the coach's office, and the sophomore angry student takes after the other player because he tripped him and pushed him on purpose. Now, my dad, I don't know how I get this because he's not the biggest dude. I mean, he's a little bit bigger now, thick. But as he tells the story, he catches the kid in the bleachers, is smashing the kid's face literally into the bleachers when somebody comes up to try to break up the fight. Now, this isn't in the safety plan, but I'll tell you, don't try to break up a fight by grabbing someone on the back, right? You don't do it. Because Dad did what any kid would do in that situation. He came up swinging. And before he could stop the swing, before he could realize it was too late, that punch was directed at the basketball coach. So my dad was no longer a part of the basketball team. My mom, you know that English language learner who is raised by a single parent? She starts her freshman year, and she is distraught. She is a social butterfly, but no one will talk to her. So she starts to develop this complex that no one loves me, no one wants to talk to me, no one will be my friend. But there's that one guy, he's the only guy that ever talks to me. But my brothers and sisters say, do not associate with Terry Lee. He is not good, and you don't hang out with him. Well, finally, after so much time of no one talking to her, she gave in and said, I have to talk to him. He's the only person who acts like he even wants to be my friend. So they start to have some conversations, and they start to date. Later, and I was kind of around for this part of it, we were swapping stories, and Dad said, well, no one was going to talk to you, because I threatened every kid in school that if they talked to you, I was going to beat them up. And they'll nod on that one. Yeah. And you know, it even gets better. Because when they were seniors in high school, my mom was elected as homecoming queen. Single parent, EL, homecoming queen. Somewhere along that same time when they were swapping stories, Dad, I don't know what he was thinking, but he told us, well, yeah, because I told every football player that if they didn't vote for her for homecoming queen, that I'd beat them up. Well, there wasn't a fight then because she was elected, but trust me, when they were swapping stories, there was a fight. There was a fight. So, anyway, you know, Mom and Dad, and they'll tell you, and this is the first time I've actually said this publicly, I've gotten permission for this one. They both graduated high school, and they had their college plans, and then figured out that they were pregnant. So they put those plans aside. Decided to go ahead and get married. Teenagers, pregnant, unwed. I'm kind of glad they decided to go ahead and get married. The rest of the story, 51st wedding anniversary this past spring, right? 51st, 52nd. Yeah, figure out how old I am. Figure out how old I am and do the math. Right? 50. I didn't want to say how old I was, though, so I was kind of... So now they've got a close approximation. Yeah, that's cool. Anyway, from that relationship, I mentioned my brothers. I was the oldest. My brother came quickly, about a year and a half after that. My brother, the things I like to tell about my brother is that when I was growing up, he was skinny and sick. But he was ornery and he got fast. A little bit like my mom, because growing up as a farm girl in southern Illinois, there were no sports except for the county fair. And not until her 8th grade year was there anyone in the county who could outrun her, boy or girl. Now my brother, it wasn't a county fair where he learned how to get fast, because the sick little scrawny dude that came second, he liked to pick a fight and run home and let brother finish it. And there were a few of those. My sis and my brother, actually, you know, he was that kid that he didn't talk a lot. He wasn't that social butterfly like his mother, and he carried the weight of the world emotionally on him. And there were physical signs while he was in high school that really were affecting his body as he was going through because of all that emotional burden that he carried. He goes off to college, academic All-American basketball player, College of St. Francis. My sister, I'm not sure what happened. The gene pool must have got better after the two of us, the experiments were being raised. But my sister actually was part of the gifted ed program. I don't know if she is valedictorian or salutatorian. Really, at that point, it doesn't matter to me. But she got to give a speech at her graduation. And she goes on, and she's a Division I volleyball player at Cape when she went off to college. Now me, maybe the most significant thing that we could start in this story is that when I was born to that young mother, I weighed 10 pounds, 13 ounces. I entered the world hungry. All right? And I mean, because at 10 pounds, 13 ounces, that's a lot of work to maintain that kind of stuff. You know? And when I was growing up, those early years, it was a little bit like my dad's earlier years. In fact, quite literally, we moved back to his town, and we lived on that side of town. Some things I remember about those early years. I call it the rat house, the house that we lived in. And the reason I call it the rat house is because every night my mom would come into the bedroom that my brother and I shared, and she'd sit on the bed and she'd rub our backs and she'd whisper in our ears, "You can do it. Whatever you want to become, you can be that. You're smart enough. You'll work hard enough. When you decide, you can do it. You can do it." And behind the whispers every night from my mom were the rats scurrying in the ceiling. We knew they were rats. One morning, that ambitious rat that was looking for the morsel hung himself on the kitchen curtain that we woke up to. My brother and I, in fact, we lived on that side of town, and we played outside a lot, did a lot of ball. And I remember there was this kid, his dad owned the car dealership in town, and he lived on that other side of town. And I remember the day that kid got a brand new bicycle. And the reason I remember that kid got a brand new bicycle is because he decided to bring that brand new bicycle and ride it over into my side of town. And he was showing off that brand new bicycle. And at the age of 4, I was not yet a football player. We played football. But I think I made the best tackle of my life when I clotheslined that kid off his bicycle and made it very clear he was not coming back into my yard. I was my father's son. I lived on that side of town. I was angry. And I'd take care of anybody that wanted to get in my way. You can ask Dad how the visit went with that kid's dad later. I understand there was... Huh?
I didn't get a good deal with the car.
Well, okay. With that, yeah. Well, while we were living on that side of town, I started kindergarten. All right? And when I went to kindergarten, I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you that I went in to kindergarten and there was this saint of a woman. Well, now wait a minute. She might have been a saint of a woman, but she wasn't a saint to me. This isn't going to be a story about how my kindergarten teacher changed my life. Maybe a little bit different. See, because my kindergarten year was complicated. And it was mostly complicated because of a girl named Sonia Sackladen. When I started kindergarten, we had moved out of the rat house and we were living in a trailer park. And Sonia's dad owned the trailer park that we were living in, right? And Sonia was beautiful. I mean, beautiful. And there was no way I was going to let any boy talk to Sonia. Because remember, I am my father's son, right? And if we'd go out for recess, and somebody tried to talk to Sonia, well, there was a fight. And they didn't get to talk to Sonia. So I'd get in trouble. And teacher would bring me in from recess. And you know what happens after recess? Sometimes, or at least it used to? Snacks. You know what a consequence for getting a fight in recess was? No snacks. So, I mean, I didn't give up the hungry thing by kindergarten. So she was not my favorite. Another thing she didn't quite understand, was that the way that we communicated our affection for each other. I mean, I could let Sonia know by punching her on the shoulder or pulling her hair that I loved her. That's how I said I loved you. But I'd get in trouble. The consequence of no snacks. So that chubby little kindergarten kid, that blonde-headed sitting over there in the corner, getting left out of snacks, that was me. That was me. Now, I left kindergarten, and for those of you that teach kindergarten, this is amazing. I remember when my son in kindergarten came home to me and he read. He read a book to me while he was in kindergarten. I left kindergarten, couldn't even tell you the 26 ABCs. Now, I could count because I needed to know how to count to keep score. Because we played ball and we would keep score. And I could count. So she was not. Sonia Sockley. Oh, in fact, there's this other piece of kindergarten. You know those portraits in kindergarten that you do where you got the little riser and you got kids like 3 rows. They're all standing to get their class picture, right? And teacher, principal standing in the back. Well, Sonia Sockleben is down on the front row, right? Over there on that side, front row. And there's a boy standing next to her. And I'm up on one of the higher rows, and in this picture, I kid you not, and I'll show it to you when we're done talking if you don't believe me. But my kindergarten picture is me scowling at the boy standing next to Sonia because I could not believe someone else was going to get to stand next to Sonia during that picture. And the funnier thing is, not only my scowl, is kind of the look of trepidation on that kid's face. Because he knew he was standing next to Sonia, and he knew what was coming. Well, some things changed after my kindergarten year, and we moved to a different town. And I went to the first grade. We moved to Mascoutah, Illinois. So we were in Mascoutah, Illinois, and Mom takes me up for first grade, and they checked me into a class, Mrs. Caliper's class. See, I remember her name. Mrs. Caliper's class, and I'm in Mrs. Caliper's class for a few weeks. And after a few weeks, Mrs. Caliper calls my mom and says, Mrs. Moeller, we need to have a meeting. Well, my mom had enough meetings from kindergarten. So this was not something she was looking forward to. Thinking things like, oh my gosh, they're going to kick him out, put him on, special needs, whatever the case may be. But we go into the meeting, Mrs. Caliper says, now listen, Mrs. Moeller, Trey is starting to learn some things, and what we're wanting to do is get him out of my class and put him in Mrs. Moss's class, because we think that he's starting to learn these things at a rate that really his needs will be better met in Mrs. Moss's class. Well, Mrs. Moss, and at the time she had to be like 97, right? Because she's this little old lady. When you're 5 or 6 years old, everybody looks like they're 90. I think is something. Whatever. But Mrs. Moss, and she says, well, all right, I'll take him in my class. But here's one thing that you got to know in my class. You're already behind. And when you come into this class, by golly, you're going to work. And she got those fingers, and she's pounding the table. And I can imagine my mom, as a mother, sitting there, she's probably going, what? Of course, I'm a little old fat kid, and I'm saying, well, work, that's all right. Grandpa says hard work's the answer to the question. So they put me in Mrs. Moss's class, and I'm behind. So Mrs. Moss says, look, Trey, you're behind. And since you're behind, you're going to have to stay in at recess. And you're going to work during recess so that you can catch up. Now, I wasn't real keen on that. Because you ask any kid their favorite subject, or at least in my day, first grade, favorite subject, recess. And Mrs. Moss was going to make me stay in for recess, right? And work so I could catch up. So that first day, I'm kind of grumbling along and doing all this, that, and the other thing, and the bell rings. Well, the other kids are starting to come into class as the bell rings after recess. And Mrs. Moss, she kind of walks by my desk. She kind of comes up. She got kind of slick, and she does one of these, rolls some Red Hots on my desk. Food. All of a sudden, staying in for recess wasn't so bad. You're going to feed me for staying in for recess? I'll stay in. I'll stay in, and I'll work. The funny thing is, when I was going to first grade, Elementary teachers didn't get a 50-minute plan time or a 45-minute plan time or a 30-minute plan time. They got recess. When I was in the first grade, I thought Mrs. Moss was mean because she made me stay in and give up my recess. You know what Mrs. Moss did? She gave me her recess. And not only did she give me her recess so that I could learn how to read, she fed me for it. Now, during the second grade, I got sick, missed a lot of school with the mumps, I think was what it was. And as my mom would tell it, lost some enthusiasm for school. And she was worried about the third grade. And when I walked into my third grade class, there was Mrs. Dawson. And actually, 2 years ago, Mrs. Dawson got to come and hear me tell this story. My mom tells me how she was so concerned that I had lost my enthusiasm for learning. And I go into the third grade, and Mrs. Dawson was the miracle that my mom had prayed for. That somehow she reignited that learning, that passion for learning that I might have had in the first grade. And Mrs. Dawson, after she listened to this story, she came up to me afterward and she said, "Trey, that wasn't it. I wasn't some answer to your prayer. All I did was make space for you to become who I saw you to be the day you walked in. When you walked in, I could tell, I could see some things in you. And as I think about it, she saw things in me that I didn't know about myself. She saw things in me that my own parents didn't see in me. And she crafted an environment to let me become." Mrs. Dawson sent me on to Mrs. Kenton, who was evil because she taught me this concept of homework. And then in the 5th grade, Mrs. Hill. In the 6th grade, Mrs. Lemke. I thought Mrs. Lemke loved me, right? She was another one of those 98-year-old teachers in the system. And I thought she loved me as my 6th grade teacher, but then she did the most evil thing any teacher could do to another student when they're in the 6th grade. Pass them so that then they have to go to the junior high. Because in the junior high, all kinds of chaos starts cutting loose. And I mean, people are mean. It's a mess. Not in Webb City. But I mean, it happens that way. In fact, one of the first people I remember from the 7th grade, and I know it was in the spring of the year, but in the 7th grade, I went out for track. All right, and I don't know what happened to the big old heavy round dude when he was little, but in the 7th grade, I was about 5'2". All right, 5'2", and I go out for track. And the first day of track, I remember I'm laying on, they line you up, and you're laying on the floor, right? And you're doing calisthenics. And there's this one, they surely don't do it anymore, but there's this one where you're laying on the floor and your feet, okay, they extend them and they say, okay, hold them 12 inches over the ground. And you got to hold them. And then you drop them, hold, whatever, okay. Well, there is no way I'm going to hold my feet right there. So I just start bouncing. I'll kick him up. And I'll do this. Anything so that because I am not going to hold them right there. And I remember I'm laying down on the ground. And this track coach, of all things, this track coach walked by. He's standing over me. He says, "Moeller, you are a wuss." I had no idea what a wuss was. But I could tell by his tone it was not a compliment. It was not a compliment. Man, I remember that track coach. I mean, they're evil. 5'2", and they put me in the shot put at one track meet. Had me do shot put. Can you imagine? Hey, where's the scrawniest kid on the team? Let's make him do shot put. Right? Now, I'm going to tell you, I got 3rd place in that meet. I really did. They only entered me because the other team didn't have any other shot putters, and if they entered 3 people, they knew they were going to get 3rd place points. So I got 3rd place out of 3. They also entered me in the 440-yard dash. 440-yard dash. Now, modern language, that's a 400 meter. 1 lap around the track, right? Now, The 440 yards didn't bother me much. But when they told me that I was running the 440-yard dash, what bothered me was the dash part. Because I thought there is no way that I'm going to dash all the way around that track. All right? Because dash means run fast. Well, I couldn't run fast in the first place. Or at least run hard. But there's no way I'm going to make it around that track. The second thing that bothered me about that 440-yard dash is that Keir Pashal was entered in that race. He was one of my classmates, my teammates. I live 6 miles from an Air Force base. These names are real because you don't know them. But Keir Pashal in the 7th grade was 6'1", 6'7" with the afro. And he was also in the 440-yard dash. And I remember distinctly we're lining up, and we didn't do the everybody gets their lane thing, right? Junior high track meets at that time for that race, it wasn't everybody gets their lane. It was kind of like the Keir Pashals. They got to line up on the inside of the track, right? They get over here on the inside of the track, and the starter gets this nice clear path for the Keirs on the team to run. And then everybody else was kind of huddled up into a bunch. I call it the good luck zone, right? Because like the starter would look at them, talk to the coaches, yeah, put that kid there, and yeah, put that kid over there in the good luck zone because it ain't good luck, right, with that one. And I remember I'm standing over here in the good luck zone, and I'm worried about Dash, and I'm worried about Keir, and I got to throw up, man. So I start heading out of the good luck zone over here to throw up, and all of a sudden that starter's pistol, boom, is fired. Well, I give up on throwing up because it's time to run, right? So I start running, and I'm giving it a dash, and I am going, and the dash gives up before the first turn. And I'm thinking, man, I really got to throw up now. But I'm thinking, that coach, what a jerk. That coach threatened me if I ever quit a race, that I didn't know what he was going to do, because he never said what he was going to do, but he just said, you don't want to find out what I'm going to do to you if you ever quit a race. So I'm thinking, well, dude, I got to throw up, but I don't want him to kill me. I'll keep running. So I kept running. I turned the corner, and I could see Keir. I'm thinking, that ain't good, but I'm running. So I turn this corner, and you know when you're sick and you're tired and you want to quit and you turn the corner, you know what happens every single time? The wind is blowing right in your face. So I turn that corner, it's like, poof, that wind hits me. And I don't want to keep going on, but I do. There's another voice in my head, you better not quit, I'm going to kill you. So I get to that halfway point, I'm at that post where we do the relay thing, and I hear all kinds of cheering. I'm thinking, man, that is great. Maybe in my despair, people are recognizing it, and they're cheering me on. So I look to my inside, and there's not one person on my side of the track. They're all at the finish line, cheering for Keir as he finishes the race. That kid could run. Man, he could run. I keep going. Now, as I come around this turn, I'm hurting. Physically, I'm hurting emotionally. I can't breathe. I don't know if it's the running or the crying, but I can't breathe. And I come out of the last turn. And, you know, if you've ever been to a junior high school track meet, usually it happens on the mile. Happens on the mile. They're going to be that kid. You know the kid that started in the good luck zone on the mile? He gets so far behind. He gets so far behind that everyone forgets he's even in the race. So they start crossing the track and they start getting ready for the next event, and it's usually the mile. Well, when I ran the 440-yard dash, it was a one-lap race. And they forgot I was still running the race. And there's people crossing the track, and the starter's at the finish line, and he makes that call. Track! Clear the track! And now I'm embarrassed. I'm crying. I'm hurting. I'm afraid of my coach. But I finish. The starter was doing his job. He was trying to help me so that I could finish the race. But at the time, I didn't appreciate it. And it just embarrassed me. I made it through junior high. I actually grew a little bit past the 5'2". And when I was a freshman in high school, I was the quarterback on the freshman football team. Pretty good. Pretty good for a kid who could only get third place in the shot put with 3 people in the event, right? I'm the freshman quarterback, and the worst thing that could ever happen to a starting freshman quarterback is the varsity quarterback gets injured. Thank you, by the way, for anybody who just thought I got moved up to the varsity quarterback position. That was not going to happen because the sophomore quarterback, Rob Flanagan, he was the one who was really an athlete, and he got moved to the varsity football quarterback position. I then got moved to the sophomore quarterback position. And what happens at the sophomore football team is that, well, let me say this. The head sophomore football coach also coached junior high track. All right? So this coach, you know, Moeller year was, that coach, he's the sophomore football coach, and all of a sudden I'm his starting quarterback as a freshman. So here's how things went. Here's how things went for me as a freshman. We'd go out, we'd run a play. If I messed up a play, the coaches would pull me over to the sidelines. They'd pull me over to the sidelines, and they'd make every sophomore on the team run. And they'd say, see, Moeller, you're bringing them down. They got to be that much better because you made a mistake. The other thing that they did is that, so I'd run quarterback on the first team. We had our first team huddle. We'd come out. We'd run the play, right? And if I did it well, we didn't mess up, and they didn't have to run, then the coach would point, and he'd point at the huddle for the second team offense. And if he pointed to the huddle on the second team offense, I'd have to go play guard. Now I was a quarterback, but I had to play guard on the second team. And if he didn't point at the second team offense, he'd point at the scout team defense. And if he pointed at the scout team defense, I had to go play linebacker. So I had to play every single play and then be back into the first team huddle as quarterback. Now, sometimes he'd give me a play off, and he wouldn't send me in at guard, and he wouldn't send me in at linebacker. Instead, he'd point at the baseball field across the practice field. And I'd have to run a lap around the baseball field and get back in the huddle in time for the next first team offensive play. And if I wasn't in the first team offensive play huddle in time, I got to stand on the sidelines and watch the sophomores run. Let's just say life in the locker room for the new quarterback was not a happy place. The sophomores were not happy with me. I'm going to take time out. Miranda, would you open that door and see if some air would come through here for us? And Melissa, would you see if you can get a hold of Mrs. Broadus, see if Vernon can turn the air conditioner back on?
I know this stat.
Can you do that for us, Jason? Thank you. Whoo-wee. It's hot up here. Yeah, sorry about that. All right. Well, I made it through freshman football, right? And then I became a sophomore, same coach on that sophomore football team. And I remember there was this drill. And I was playing outside linebacker. So I'm playing outside linebacker, and there's this drill where basically I've got to come across the line of scrimmage and keep everything on the inside. And the drill is for me to learn how to attack the running back who gets a 20-yard running start at me, and we have a collision. And we learn how to have a collision. So I'm coming across, and bam, I take the runner on, and I'm heading back to the end of the line, and the coach, same coach says, Moeller again. So I jump up there again, and running back gets a 20-yard run. I come across the line, and bam, there's a collision. I do it 7, 8 times. I mean, I'm like, dude, how many times? Moeller again. So I get lined up. One of my classmates, he's a sophomore with me. His name's Jin Chin King. He's about this tall and about this wide. All right, these names are real too, by the way. Remember, Air Force Base. Jin Chin, I'm not sure what he had against me that day, but he wanted some. So I come across 7th, 8th time, and I mean, Jin Chin, we get it, boom. Have you ever been knocked out? I wasn't knocked down. I said knocked out. So I'm standing there, and I'm opening my eyes, and I'm thinking, well, I wonder if there's a nice person in the community who'll buy me a CNI dog, because I know we don't have enough money to buy my own dog. We're going to have this CNI dog, and how long is it going to take me to learn Braille? But all of a sudden, it's like, comes back. So I'm standing there, my vision just came back to me, I'm shaking it off. I start running back to the end of the line. Coach says, Moeller, again. He just knocked me out, Coach. I mean, there were no concussion protocols in the early 80s, by the way. So I line up, and I'm ready. Coach says, out. Now, for some of you mamas, you're thinking, now, if that coach says that word to one of my boys, if that coach gets my boy beat up in the locker room, if that coach makes my son line up like that, I'm going to guarantee you I'm going to have words with that coach. I'm going to have words with that principal. I'm going to have words with that superintendent. I'm going to have words with that school board. There was a little problem. There was a little problem with that plan. You see, that coach used to take his son to his dad's house where they'd light the charcoal grill, pitch horseshoes, and listen to Jack Buck do the play-by-play of Cardinal baseball. See, that coach had been raised knowing that part of the answer to life was hard work. He also wanted his sons to know that not only do you have to work hard, but life's tough, not fair. And sometimes you got to be a little tougher. Time went on. I became a college football player. My wife was a college volleyball player. We met. It was a match made in heaven. We both got teaching and coaching jobs at Webb City High School. Life was amazing. And we were expecting our first child, Trishelle. In 1992, I remember the dreams, the hopes that we had for the child that was coming to us. I mean, we knew all the right lessons, right? I mean, we knew how to work hard. We knew life was tough, not fair. By golly, we're educators. We've got all these people in our background. Who knows what she's going to accomplish? I remember that summer when she was I remember that spring when she was born. In the delivery room, the first time I held Trishelle. All those hopes, all those dreams, and the sense of purpose that overwhelmed me as I held her. The affirmation of the life that we would live. I also remember 2.5 months later. It was summertime. I was coming home from one of our football practices, our camp sessions. And I remember walking in the back door and hearing my wife scream. It was one of those screams that if you've never heard it, you still know something's not right. It's one of those screams that if you've ever heard it, you'll never forget it. I went running through the room to find my 2.5-month-old daughter, my perfect daughter, laying on the floor having a grand mal seizure. We rushed her to the hospital. The doctors did everything they could to try to stop the seizures. In the middle of that night, they came into the room, unable to stop the seizures. And they asked us, would you like us to fly your daughter to Tulsa or to Kansas City? At the time, there was no NICU unit in Joplin. And I said, Tulsa or Kansas City, what do you mean? The doctor said, that's where we fly all of the critically ill infants. Oh, critically ill. I don't know. Tulsa, fly her to Tulsa. My wife flew in the helicopter with Trishelle as they took her to Tulsa. My sister was in town visiting that part of the summer, so she and I went back to the house, threw some things together, and we drove. By the time I got to Tulsa, the doctor pulled me aside. He said, now listen, Trey, I want to tell you something. When you go in to see your daughter, here's what we've figured out. Here's what we've figured out. Somehow she's contracted a viral infection. That infection has gone through her spinal fluid and into her cranial cavity. That viral infection it would be like unscrewing the top of her skull and pouring hydrochloric acid on her brain, because the infection is just literally dissolving the brain cells. And I want you to know that of all the infants who come in this condition, 50% will live. Of the 50% who live, about 2 or 3% will live a life that to the outside world appears to be normal. The others, they'll be different. As I went into the room, there was my perfect daughter in a drug-induced coma with wires scanning her brain activity, with a breathing tube and a machine breathing for her. With an IV in her arm, pumping already digested nourishment into her system. And an IV cut in next to her heart where the seizure medication was being applied. Because it was a virus, there was no medicine. They needed to shut every function down so that every ounce of energy, even the energy used to breathe, to digest food, would be made available for her body to fight that infection. And we spent 9 days in a drug-induced coma. While she was in that coma, our family came, and our new family came. The community of Webb City schools. I wasn't sure they were going to be able to start school because so many of them were spending time in Tulsa that summer. Her life was different than we had planned. Our lives became different than what we had planned. I remember years later, going through the IEP process. The school people loved us. We'd go to an IEP meeting and there'd be 12 people from the school because everybody loved Trishelle. And we were part of the Webb City family as teachers and administrators. And they loved her. But we hurt. And we were hurting. My wife, the delicate flower, would sometimes seem broken by the hurt. In fact, probably about the second or third grade-ish, because the ages were different, she stopped coming to IEP meetings because she couldn't handle the hurt. I would go to the IEP meetings, and I remember one particular IEP meeting that I went to, and literally I also remember the conversation after the IEP meeting when one of my bosses scolded me for the arrogance and the attitude that I walked into that IEP meeting with. I was hurting. The years of providing every personal care need for my daughter, the ongoing seizures that still 26 later happen, and I was angry. I wasn't angry at the people, but I was angry at the circumstances. And I remember getting scolded for my arrogance when I walked into an IEP meeting. I remember thinking, man, take some time. Look past the surface. Really? You going to scold me? IEPs. The annual reminder that we're required by law to have for parents to remember there's something wrong with their kid. And we wonder why they come in hurt. We wonder why they come in angry. We wonder why they don't want to come in at all. I remember, I'll make this part quick. I remember being isolated from the world, pushing Trishelle down the mall hallway, and literally watching the oncoming people move to the other side and walk as far away from us as they could walk. I remember all the basketball games as a former basketball player, basketball coach, and all the times that I go into a gym and sit down in the one corner where a wheelchair will go alone with my daughter. Isolated. Avoided. As if something was wrong with me, with her. I'm not sure how we did it. No, I am sure how we did it. But 4 years later, okay, I'm coming off stage for that one because that one could really go a bad place, okay? So just, my apologies. 4 years later, my son was born. And you know what? In our prayers, dear God, just give us someone average. Average is great for us. We just want to be ordinary, normal. We want to be able to actually associate with his friends' families and hang out at the ballpark or whatever. And you know what I realized as a parent of that average kid? That was all a lie. It was all a lie. Because every time he got cut, every time he got measured up, man, that hurt. It hurt every time. And the gut-wrenching experiences as a parent, even though I knew we were blessed beyond belief, what we brought to that situation as a parent was so powerful. So powerful. Next week, parents at open house and their children are going to walk into your classroom. Next week, those students are going to start class in your classroom. And I wonder who they're going to find. Because you know what? They're going to come into the class. The rich, the poor, the happy, the sad, the angry, the broken. From substance abuse, from single parents, as English language learners, the gifted valedictorian, the not so gifted with an IEP. The ones who run and think like Kier, it was a gift. It just happened. And those who ran the race, like me, who needed help. And people forgot they were even in the race. They're going to walk in your classroom next week. Because it's not just my story. It's everybody's story. Who are they going to find? Will they find? Will they find a teacher who will whisper in their ears, "You can do it"? Will they find the teacher who will give up their recesses so that they can be successful? Will they find the teacher who will see something in them that they don't even see in themselves, that their parents don't even see in themselves? Will they find the teacher that will look below the surface, will be curious enough to see what's really happening and avoid the furious judgment? Will you be the one that just won't let that kid quit? Who will they find? You choose. I hope it's an amazing 2018-2019 school year. Before you get to go to lunch, Bob Foose wants a picture of all of you as the hiring class of 2018. So, as we make our way down, my guess is that if you go down that hall and take the right to the big lobby toward where we're going, somewhere on one of those sets of steps, Bob will line you up and get your picture before you go into lunch. Thank you very much for your attention, and again, good luck.